All right, folks. Welcome to February 2020 Ruby Conference. I'm your host, CS Joseph, sounding all official-like, even though I don't really care that much about being official, but, why not pretend to be official because I can do that, etc. Couple of things. Last month was pretty interesting, pretty cool. Since then, I had the opportunity to get to know Dr. John Beebe. I got to meet him in person. He actually signed this book, um, which is pretty awesome. And I great. And I got to shake his hand, and he told me that he considers me a colleague, which I thought is pretty cool. And I'm going to be this year releasing my book, because that's his book, but then we'll have my book, and I'm hoping that he will write the foreword to my book, actually, in it, and so that'll be really fantastic to have that opportunity, to have Mr. Beebe writing the foreword to the book, which is cool. I like that. I think that's a fantastic, and I feel very honored to have that opportunity. So, but anyway. I got to sit down and watch his entire presentation going through energies and patterns and psychological type, and he basically did movie analysis the entire time. He took every interaction between a person's type versus and it's funny just watching him because he's still kind of buys into a little bit of the MBTI effect, when he's talking about J types versus P types, etc. Even though he's very in his psychological functions. But it's also very interesting to find out because, to my knowledge, Linda Behrens doesn't like me at all. And we found that out because she was spam posting on the YouTube channel with links to her stuff, basically shilling, and then telling people that I don't know what I'm talking about, which was a very odd interaction. And I actually had to ban Linda Behrens from the YouTube channel. That was a very interesting experience. And I talked to Dr. John Beebe about that. And he's like, well, you got to understand something. All of us, psychologists in this area, we all talk to each other. I know Dr. Behrens. I talked to Dario Nardi. He's telling, people in the CSJ meetup some things, telling me some things. And basically the message that he brought forth was, hey, just be aware that we were going to change the world. We were going to do all these things with this science. And then all of a sudden these YouTubers came out of nowhere and basically stole it all from us. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So I guess that explains some of the basic hostility. But let's be honest, guys, I don't really consider myself a YouTuber. I just don't. I haven't really posted much on the channel recently. And that's because I've been putting out a lot of fires with my health, and also putting a lot of fires with the business, and trying to make sure that we're on track. But mostly, whereas all of my time has basically gone into one of three things. One, getting content out to patrons, first and foremost. That's my top priority. Two, getting the ultimate messaging formula up and out there. That's kind of my other priority. And then priority three, which we've made significant headway on, is getting the test out. Our CSJ official personality test, which it is so around the corner. We just finished all of the written components of the test. The only thing that's left is the video components. And then once that's done, the test is done, and we are going to launch it. And I'm very excited about having that opportunity to that end. But mostly, guys, most of my time has gone into the test, and making the algorithm for it was very taxing. Getting all the written components done, because the test teaches people how to take the test while you take the test. That way they get because the test is 100% accurate. It is 100% accurate. The problem is that when you introduce human error, people who take the test incorrectly, then they could have an incorrect result. So we spent so much time investing on the written language, and we're going to be spending a lot of time on the video language, how the videos are done with it, just so that you literally can't make a mistake unless you just decide to not read anything or watch anything. then you'll make a mistake. Ruby conference, February 2020. Let's get on to the main. Let's get on to the main content. I don't know how long it's going to take. It could be 30 minutes. It could be 40 minutes. It could be an hour. It could be an hour and a half. I don't know. I really don't know how long this one's going to take. The reason why is because I might be involving you folks a little bit more than typical conferences. I know for a while the conferences were just kind of like, I don't know, shoot the shit or whatever. And then they turned into me bringing on guests, and they turned on to me actually delivering a lecture of some kinds. And then other times, so it's just kind of, whatever. But the thing is, though, getting to know Dr. John Beebe, as I had mentioned before, I was able to getting a little bit more insight into Jungian dream analysis. And that's what this conference is about tonight. It's about Jungian dream analysis. And I'll be honest, I don't actually know very much about Jungian dream analysis. I just know that, like, when given the area of the state of California that I live in, there's a very popular Jungian psychology group. And I actually went to that group, and they are hardcore Jungians. And I mean, when I mean hardcore Jungians, I mean, like, they're so hardcore Jungian, they're almost like a cultic about it. Like, I mean, like, it's scary, like there's tarot cards and, lots of, the way they sit around in a circle, and they pull out all these books, and they do, and then they find out, it's just this, it's funny. It's an INFP who runs the group, and his wife is an INFJ. And they're just trying to, see how people react to these various deep books that they have people read. So it's almost like a book group. And they do analysis of various poems, analysis of various movies, and people share their dreams. They do dream analysis. My sister, she's an ESFJ. She got really big into dream analysis recently, and she actually bought like one of those super popular dream analysis books. I don't remember the exact name of the book. If anyone here knows the name of that book, please put it in the chat, please. It's the one that came out a couple of years ago, but basically, like, it's got every single symbol or experience within a dream, and it's got an entire matrix that you could just kind of look up, the meanings of what those dreams are. And, and dream interpretation has gone back in history. I mean, the entire story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, biblically speaking, that's a story about dream analysis. It's a story about dream interpretation. And Jung published some works on dream interpretation and dream analysis multiple times. And if I remember correctly, because it's been so long, how he approached it is that, the shadow side of your mind, the shadow is where, what directly impacts your dreams, and when you go to sleep, it's your ego going to sleep, and then your shadow's able to have a little bit more freedom. And that's the primary source of your dreams, basically, is what your shadow is all about. And the struggles or the successes of your shadow self is ultimately where these dreams come from. And Carl Jung went on further to explain that, hey, when through dream analysis and through dream interpretation, the interpretation also of symbols, etc., and collective symbols, it's how he actually developed his theory for the collective unconscious of man, ultimately known as extroverted intuition, which is basically humanity's collective fate, humanity's the future of humanity, the collective intention, the collective desire of humanity to go in a certain direction. And if you look forward, there's some, using biblical examples again. This is actually, I'm also going to use some occultic examples because Jungianism has a very interesting relationship with occultism, etc., or the occult as we know it. But no, I am not an occultist, so like, don't freak out about that. For those of you that maybe like a Christian person and I'm talking about the occult, I am not an occultist. I studied it. I had to study it a lot in order to get to the level that I am with the psychology, because that part of Jungianism. I mean, typology is one thing, but people really need to understand dream interpretation. They need to understand the collective unconscious, right? And unless you understand those standpoints, you will not be able, or those points of view, you will not be able to understand typology. Think of typology like if typology, using an analogy, if typology is like algebra, if we're going to compare it to algebra, what zero is to algebra, the concept of zero, because you cannot do algebra without a concept of zero, basically. If you have a concept of zero, then you could do algebra. Well, if zero is to algebra, then extroverted intuition is that to Jungian analytical psychology, or Jungianism, or Jungian psychology. You have to understand expert intuition. You have to understand the collective unconscious of man. And, you know, throughout, throughout history, Jung's main point is that, hey, two cultures that have never had contact with one another, those cultures end up still having the same overarching themes, even in their architecture. The Mayan pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, the story of Nimrod and the story of Nimrod and Nimrod's son, and Babylonianism, also known as the mystic Babylon religion, right? When compared to the Egyptian pantheon, the story of Osiris and Set, right? Whereas Set came from Seth, which is the person who murdered Nimrod's father, basically, in the old Babylonian story, etc. And basically, the Egyptian pantheon is a direct copy of the same pantheon within Babylon, essentially. And that same pantheon moves over across the earth to the other side of the planet. We look at the Maya, the Aztecs, and you look at similar pantheons. You look at the Greek pantheon, and all these different belief systems all stem from and have the same themes. The hero's journey itself, the concept of a hero, the concept of a boy reaching manhood, all these different themes within culture are represented all around the world, yet these cultures speak different languages, and a lot of these cultures never had contact with one another, yet they tell the same stories. And it's because Jung figured out that these stories, these symbols, are innate to human nature and they're not learned behaviors. They're natural. They are all about nature. They're not nurture, right? And coming to discover this, he called this the collective unconscious of man. It's the collective will of man. It's the collective fate of man. And let's look at some biblical examples, right? Let's look at some biblical examples. Look at some occult examples of that. One of my favorite biblical examples is actually Noah's Ark. The argument from a Jungian psychological standpoint when applied to the story of Noah's Ark is that, so the story goes basically, Noah's some guy, and the whole world basically goes down to hell in a handbasket, essentially, and he's like the only good man left. So, and then like God tells him to build a boat because he's going to flood the earth and everyone in it, and everyone's going to die, but he's going to save his family because he's a good man. And then Noah does it, and people freak out at him, and they make fun of him, and they, shit all over him and whatnot. But Noah eventually completes the boat. It rains for 40 days, 40 nights. The earth floods, and then everyone dies, except he lives after those 40 days. And they find dry land, and the ark supposedly sits on Mount Ararat these days. And, like, I don't know if you look it up, there's actually, like, interestingly boat-shaped ruins on top of Mount Ararat. And archaeologists have claimed that when Turkey has given them access to that mountain, that they can actually prove that the ark was there, but that's a whole other thing. But the point is, the point is that the Jungians make the argument that in this biblical story that the collective unconscious of man, with all that collective symbology, all that collective will, that collective desire itself, the collective will of mankind basically rose against God, rose against the creator, and they had to be wiped out, essentially. And that's really what the story of Noah's Ark is all about. Because if you think about it, mankind is populating the planet, right? But then mankind gets wiped out. The collective unconscious of man is reduced basically down to like a single family. It's tiny. And so as a result, after a lot of years, it would not, it would not rise against the creator again. Well, according to the occultic lore, what was really happening at that time is that Atlantis existed in those days. And I don't know about people. You can talk about the Great Flood and how that affects Pangea and the like. That's more of the evolutionist point of view. And I don't have my evolution expert, Mr. Eric Pogel. He actually runs the evolution. He also runs the creation. He runs both subreddits. He's able to argue both sides very well. He's a very fantastic fellow. And I hope to actually have him as a guest in the very near future to discuss these topics. But because he'll argue both sides. I mean, the guy's brilliant. But according to the occultic lore, is, in terms of what was happening during the Noah's Ark situation, is that the Great Flood was basically to take out Atlantis, because Atlanteans had developed a technology or a methodology with which they could reach a kind of ascension and reach immortality, right? And so then eventually celestial beings got together and decided to wipe out Atlantis and drown them all to death. Because they could not allow mankind to reach immortality. And according to the occultic lore, that's why Noah's Ark happened, essentially. So that's the occultic side of it. Now let's fast forward to when the second time that this happened. The second time in history, biblically speaking, that the collective unconscious rose against God, the creator, happened at the Tower of Babel. And but this time, instead of wiping out all of humanity, what happened was, hold on, but let's talk about the Tower of Babel. What is the Tower of Babel? The Tower of Babel itself, basically, they believed within their belief system that they could ascend and gain immortality through this tower. And what was the Tower of Babel? A lot of people think it was like some kind of magical engine, kind of like what the occultists teach about the pyramids of Giza, which we'll get to in a bit. Well, actually, I'll talk about now. So the pyramids essentially were supposed to be these engines of attracting souls from the great of beyond to bring them down to earth, specific to the pyramids, so that they could find their way back to the Egyptian people so they could be reincarnated, basically. Reincarnation is a major occultic teaching, and it's no different from the Babylonian and also the Egyptian pantheon. So that's why the pyramids of Giza exist. Well, guess what? The Tower of Babel was said to be the same kind of thing. And the Babylonians believed through controlling the cycle of rebirth, they could gain immortality, basically. And the other thing that the Tower of Babel was is that it was a library. It was where all human knowledge was contained in one place, okay? So the Tower of Babel, it was where all human knowledge was contained in one place within this tower. And Babylon was the greatest city on the planet. And all of mankind was effectively one nation, one culture, one language, one world government. Okay? Literally one world government. And they all follow the same belief system, the same mystery Babylon religion, or it's Babylonian mysticism, essentially, which became the Egyptian religion, which became the Greek religion, and so on and so forth, with each rendition down the generations. But it's still, like, paganism itself is the exact same belief system as the original Babylonian mysticism. It's exactly the same. So when you're considering these things, when we talk about the collective unconscious, you look at the Tower of Babel. It was a library. It's where mankind collected all of their knowledge for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to reach immortality, to reach ascension, just like the Atlanteans did. And if you actually go back in the book of Genesis, from the Jungian point of view, God actually stands looking up at the tower or looking down at the tower, or whatever perspective, looking at the tower, and he's like, hey, this is Genesis chapter 11, verse 6. If humanity, or if as one people can come together as one, and then they speak the same language, if they can accomplish this, looking at the Tower of Babel, then nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. This is basically God the Creator admitting that humanity has the unlimited power for to do anything it wants or wills to. And that's what the collective unconscious of man, according to Carl Jung, is truly about. It is the collective will of mankind. And by having a divided will, a house divided against itself cannot stand. But when mankind has a united will, they can accomplish anything. And the Tower of Babel was a symbol of that. Just like the Atlantis itself as a city was a symbol for the Atlanteans, who had the same exact objective, immortality, right? Well, it goes on, with the story, and instead of wiping out mankind, God the Creator decides to confuse everyone's language, and entire families are split. They can't even talk to each other anymore. So all the people of the earth, or at that time, just group up in people who speak the same language, and then they're scattered across the earth, and that became the nations. And that's why we have different languages, according to the story. So if you think about that from the collective unconscious, think of the collective unconscious like water. And this is why expert intuition is known as the water element, okay? Human beings are like water. This is why in Revelation chapter 13, when John the Revelator says, I see a beast coming out of the sea, and he's talking about the Antichrist, etc. And in terms of, and who knows what the interpretation of that story is, but a beast coming out of the great sea. The great sea is people. The great sea is humanity. The collective unconscious, metaphysically speaking, is literally water, okay? And each human being is a droplet of water. Think about that. So within Babylon, you have all of humanity speaking the same language and all in one place. And there's just this big lake, basically. Another good reference, if you do Star Trek Deep Space Nine, talk about the changelings being in the Great Lake, when they're in this huge ass lake, because they can liquefy themselves and join each other and just become this giant lake of collective consciousness, collective unconsciousness, all in one place within this Great Lake. That's the Star Trek point of view. If you haven't watched Star Trek Deep Space Nine, seriously, please do it. It is one of the most greatest pieces of writing ever done, and drama. If you enjoy drama, you'll like Star Trek. The political intrigue is insane. My favorite episode is an episode called "In the Pale Moonlight," and it talks about this ENTP spy who ends up fooling everybody and then causing a nation to end up going into war against the enemy. And after he ended up doing some really, really unethical things, and it's an amazing story. Kind of has that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy approach. That character's name is Garrick. He's my favorite character in all of Star Trek. Definitely an ENTP. But that's my most favorite episode of Star Trek, hands down, is In the Pale Moonlight. It's unbelievable. It really speaks to me, But this whole idea of this symbol of the collective unconscious being like water is everywhere. It itself is a symbol. It's a collective symbol, and Jung knew this. Just like we see in Star Trek, how we have the Great Lake and the Changelings, just like we see in the Bible with the Tower of Babel and Atlantis. It's the same exact thing. But the point that Jungians make when they're looking at the Bible is that when it comes to the collective unconscious, so it looks like the extroverted intuition, it looks like humanity has this big pool of water, and each person is a droplet in this big pool of water. Ultimately, because of the human condition and what the Christians call sin nature, because of sin nature, ultimately, every time mankind is united in that way, the collective unconscious of man, the collective will of man, ultimately rises and rebels against God the Creator every time, and which leads to some kind of catastrophe, like the flood, like having all their language confused and being scattered across the earth, and ultimately the Tower of Babel, the greatest library that humanity has ever seen, being thrown around. Every single piece of knowledge within humanity was put inside the Tower of Babel. That library became humanity's own philosopher's stone to literally transmute reality, metaphysically speaking. Because the result of taking all human knowledge across the earth and all putting them in the same language and putting them in this library of the Tower of Babel, we're talking from the occultic point of view now, okay? By doing this, the tower itself became an engine to control the cycle of rebirth for humanity through knowledge, because it became this I win button that they were going to use. They're building this I win button. They're building this philosopher's stone that they were going to use to give humanity immortality, or, a select few of humanity, if you think about it. As it says in Aladdin, when Jafar disguises the old man as talking to 11, the golden rule, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. He who has the power to give man immortality and save man from his fear of death is the one who makes the rules, right? So here's the thing. Why is this relevant? Well, it goes on further. The Genesis chapter 11, verse 6, there's a few prerequisites to make humanity. Humanity is absolutely capable of anything. Nothing humanity sets out to do is impossible for it. Humanity has, it's almost as if God gave his power to humanity, basically. And of course, because humanity is, quote, made in his image, right? According to Genesis as well. And if that's the case, from a Jungian point of view, what can we learn, psychologically speaking, about mankind based on the verse Genesis chapter 11, verse 6? We can learn specifically that, if man is together in one place, if they are united with a common goal and they speak the same language, then nothing they set out to do will be impossible. And those are the two prerequisites. Well, that's what people had at Atlantis. That's what people had at the Tower of Babel. So when all of mankind's languages were confused, that pool, that big lake of people, and within that sea, and then all of a sudden they're scattering across the earth. It was like taking little tiny, taking that huge sea of people at the Tower of Babel and turning them into small little lakes, aka nations, around the entire world. And then the collective unconscious, whereas before with Noah's Ark, they were just reduced to one little family, one little dot, one little collection of droplets, little puddle, right? Whereas they took this huge sea and just separated it and scattered it across the earth, basically, like it was raining on the earth. You know what I'm saying? Water cycle symbology, right? Wait a minute, that's another form of extrovert intuition. So, because it's based on the element of water, then all of mankind is spread across. And then all of a sudden, if you look at it, the total collective unconscious of man is separated from each other. They can't speak each other's language. They're scattered. They don't know anymore. As a result, it would take a lot of time for all that water to come back together and recreate the big sea. And then the collective unconscious, once again, will rebel against God again the third time in their quest for getting over their fear of death, in their quest for immortality. Folks, did you know that the Tower of Babel has returned? It's the internet. The internet itself, because we're speaking the universal language of numbers, all knowledge of humanity is being collected in one place, the internet, right? And then as a result of all that shared knowledge, once again, mankind is going to get to the point where we are going to be capable of anything once again, and then we'll be in for our bid or our quest for immortality to get over our fear of death once again. And who knows what catastrophe that will lead us to once again. It's these same recurring themes over and over and over, right? And it's because of these recurring themes. You can see these recurring themes in the Babylonian mysticism. You can see it in the Egyptian pantheon. You can see it in Greek paganism. You can see it in Catholicism. You can see it in Islam. It doesn't matter. You can see it in Hinduism, Taoism, all of these different themes. They're everywhere. What do you think the teachings of the Force are about? They're based on, in Star Wars, they're about Eastern philosophy. All of these stories come from somewhere. Many groups call it the Akashic Records. That's another occultic point of view. Other people call it, some word of faith Christians, they call it the gift of knowledge when they're talking about spiritual gifts, etc. But that's their approach. And it doesn't matter your belief system. It doesn't matter your spirituality. The themes are mostly the same all the way across. Like the concept of the virgin birth actually predated the birth of Jesus Christ. The virgin birth goes all the way back to the mystery Babylon religion, talking about Nimrod's mother giving a virgin birth to Nimrod, or the birth to Horus, right? The Horus's birth was a virgin birth. That's all the way back to Egyptian times, right? So you can see it doesn't matter the story, it doesn't matter the source. Humanity, even though these cultures didn't have contact with one another, we still inherit the same stories over and over and over and over, right? Oh, I forgot to mention that after the flood with Noah, life's lifespan got reduced big time. And then the same thing happened again after the Tower of Babel. And how many thousands of years has it been since the Tower of Babel? And we're having our Tower of Babel through the internet being constructed again. I wonder what's going to happen. But the bottom line is that from a Jungian standpoint, the collective unconscious is a thing. So I had to establish that before we go into dream interpretation. So the collective unconscious, that's a thing. And when Jung was studying dreams, he discovered the collective unconscious, and that's what allowed him to start really considering the existence of cognitive senses. And that's what cognitive functions are, but he called them cognitive senses, right? And through these cognitive senses, he was able to start interpreting dreams in a different way, completely different way, because he kept on seeing people reliving these same stories. And he noted that dreams would start to be different depending on which person had what cognitive sense. Now, remember, Carl Jung, when talking about cognitive senses, he just identified the first two senses. Be like, oh, you're an extroverted thinker and an introverted intuitive, right? Something to that effect. He didn't care, or even, well, he probably cared, but he didn't go deeper to like 8 functions. He didn't look at 4 sides of mind. It just wasn't about that, because even then it was still pretty new to him. Let's be honest, right? So knowing the 8 cognitive senses, then he was able to apply them directly to dream interpretation, right? Now, dream interpretation from a cognitive sense standpoint, he started to see things in a different way. And he noticed that there was still a pattern. And that's the thing, that's really the main point of what extrovert intuition is as an idea in terms of the collective unconscious, is that all that has happened before will happen again. It's a pattern. It's an Ouroboros. It's a yin and yang equilibrium. Everything is recycled. It is the cycle of rebirth itself. The Tower of Babel, if you think about it, the Tower of Babel is a direct challenge to the collective unconscious, symbolically speaking, if you actually think about it. Because the Tower of Babel, with mankind reaching ascension, is basically putting a stop to that cycle of rebirth going, in the pagan / occultic point of view, saying it from that point of view. It's stopping that cycle of rebirth, freezing people in time. This is why, from a vampire standpoint, vampires are considered undead because they just stop growing. And growth ultimately leads to death. But if you stop death, you're freezing people in time, essentially. They're not growing anymore. The cycle of rebirth is broken. The extrovert intuition, NE, yin and yang, Ouroboros effect is basically completely broken. And it's almost like it's very unnatural. You could actually, you could even go forward and explore these themes. It's very well documented in the television show The Vampire Diaries, or the television show The Originals. Listen to what the witches are always talking about when I talk about the immortality spell that a powerful witch used to turn her own family into vampires. She granted them immortality, but in order to stay immortal, they would have to eat people's blood to stay lively enough, essentially. And they kept on saying that it was a sin against nature. The witches were always saying it's a sin against nature, because it is unnatural. Immortality is unnatural. Man ascending in that capacity is unnatural, right? And this is heavily explored even further with the same exact themes, guys, the collective unconscious, the same exact themes. It's explored even further in the story of Altered Carbon. If you've read the books Altered Carbon, or if you had the opportunity to watch the TV show, I'll be honest with you guys, I think the TV show is way better than the books. Let's be straight. I fundamentally believe the TV show is better. And season 2 is actually about to come out in like a week, by the way, or 2 weeks. It's coming out this month. And Anthony Mackie is playing the main character, which is really exciting. Joel Finneman did a fantastic job in season 1. If you haven't seen Altered Carbon yet, please do, and think of this lecture the entire time while you're doing it. It is very Tower of Babel because mankind, an ENTP granted mankind immortality. And as much as I understand that I, an ENTP, in my psychological work that I'm doing will ultimately be utilized to grant mankind immortality via technology in some capacity, it's the same thing, right? Because that's what my work will be turned into. My work, the purpose of my work is to grant mankind the ability to understand themselves so they can love and forgive themselves. And then through that, then they can start to understand their fellow human beings, then they can love and forgive their fellow human beings. And then fatherlessness and war and all these horrible things as we know it will cease to exist. And then at long last, we could be a united race built upon each other's personal and mutual welfare instead of, something that's so, lame, like being a slave to an immortality system that you don't know if you're really alive or dead, But the point is that from dream interpretation, why am I talking about all these shows? I forgot to mention, like, dream interpretation, you have to understand that a lot of the stories that we have in our dreams, the same themes that show up in our dreams are also the same themes that show up in movies. That's why, you look at horror films, they can be pretty nightmarish, but someone had a nightmare about that once. And then and then they developed it into a story and then brought that to the screen, right? Or a book, right? Sometimes they could come from people who are tormented, or they could come from people who dream of being a tormentor, right? Tormentor. This is where it comes from. This is where these themes come from. And this is the direction that Carl Jung has been taking this, through his looking glass, right? Hey, this is where all these themes are coming. This is where all the symbology is coming. It's a pattern, all these metaphysical concepts. The metaphysical is far more real than the physical. Physical is not really as real as the metaphysical. The metaphysical is far more powerful. And him, as any parent, was able to recognize this pattern. That's what expert intuition is. It's pattern recognition. All that has happened before will happen again, the Ouroboros. But if you introduce immortality, it's as if time itself has stopped. And then all of a sudden, all of nature will bend around that, and it literally creates a maelstrom. It creates a maelstrom where everything will ultimately be destroyed because there's that one unnatural thing that exists in nature. It's a sin against nature, basically. And I don't think Carl Jung was really aware of that. Now, where do we tie all of this methodology that Carl Jung utilized with dream interpretation, cognitive senses, expert intuition, the collective unconscious of man, and how it's developed in our society as movies, it's developed or comic books or shows or written works, books, stories. It doesn't matter, all of it. The spoken word, all of these themes are very similar. Like, there's nothing new under the sun, right? As biblically speaking, like from the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon, the wisest man who walked the earth, technically speaking, said that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's been lived, everything's been tried, and we're just reliving these constant themes over and over and over again within this cycle of rebirth, psychologically speaking. Now, if that's the case, then what happens? How has it changed or grown till now? Because now we have 8 cognitive senses. Now we have before I even go, and we also have the 4 sides of the mind, but 8 cognitive senses. when looking at Dr. John Beebe specifically with his book, looking at his book, when during his presentation, he actually talked about, like, he brought like movies to like demonstrate a scene of a movie to demonstrate every single one of his points, psychological points, to the audience within the room. And a lot of his points were right on. And I was like, wow, this is really impressive. And he absolutely was starting to show you, Jung's dream analysis has been turned into this, movie analysis. And then ultimately, the main point he was trying to get at is that tropes, there's all of these tropes. If you want to know what the study of extrovert intuition is, if you want to know the study of the collective unconscious is, the real study of that is studying tropes. So look up TV tropes, TROPES, on the internet and read every single one. Here's a very common trope: Mary Sue, the all-powerful female lead character that is literally perfect in every way and nothing bad can happen to her and there's never a challenge. Well, where do we see that recently? The character Rey in Star Wars, she's a Mary Sue. The character Daenerys Targaryen, she's a Mary Sue, right? That's a trope. And it's this kind of trope that shows up over and over and over within humanity. And each of these tropes are roles that mankind can play. Something also very interesting that John Beebe stated within this meeting is that, when people take on various roles, like the role of father, the role of mother, right? They take on these roles and they begin to behave like those roles, even though that behavior is not natural to their own role, basically, to who they are themselves, basically. They're taking on the title and they're behaving like that title. And when you take on the title of father, you take on all the responsibilities of that title, or dad, right? You take on the title of dad, you're taking on all of the responsibilities that go along with being a dad. And as soon as you cease performing those responsibilities as a dad, you cease to be a dad, basically, right? That's different than father, obviously. Father is just providing your genetic material so that a child could be made, in the physical realm at least. So, whereas dad is actually taking on the role of raising said child, right? It's a little different, right? So people take on these roles, and sometimes people will cling to these roles to the point of even sacrificing their own life. Like in a war situation, someone who's a leader of their men and sacrificing his life for the sake of his men and leading them to safety in a situation and jumping on a grenade. He took on that role all the way to the end because he himself was not willing to let go of that role, lest he be shamed or feel guilt for losing that role. And everything is very role-based. And these roles are all explained through tropes. And tropes are each individual pieces of the collective unconscious. This is how it oftentimes seems like when you watch a movie, it seems like, hey, I'm watching a movie and it's like, wow, these guys obviously understand type. They know typology. Okay, sure, maybe some of them do, but for the most part, they actually don't. What they're doing is they're writing through tropes, right? And tropes through the collective unconscious, through these recurrent symbols, these recurrent stories, these recurrent roles, these recurrent titles, these recurrent behaviors of man are basically all tracked within tropes. And even our typology, our personalities, are expressed through tropes, right? So tropes end up becoming the new dream analysis. If movies and the like are the next level above Jung's dream analysis. But then it gets even more complicated. Then you look at the four sides of the mind. We've been talking a lot, and everyone's a Ruby patron here. Everyone understands that there's season 19 going on right now where we're talking about cognitive development, cognitive integration, reaching enlightenment, right? Which enlightenment to the occultists, enlightenment to the Atlanteans, enlightenment to the Babylonians, enlightenment to, you know, when the sea of man comes together in a one world order, just like they will before, when all the droplets and all the puddles and all the lakes become one big ocean again. At that point in time, um, humanity have come together again, and then they'll try to ascend and go for immortality once again. Uh, you know, when that happens, you know, from the four sides of the mind, when we're looking at like we're looking at you know, how do we analyze that? Like, what's actually going to happen when that occurs? What happens is that when people are able to assume different roles. People are able to assume these different tropes, these different titles, in a lot of very fascinating ways. I'm sorry, guys, I just realized I confused everyone because I just like tangented like 3 ways towards myself there. I have to backtrack that a little bit. What am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that if you look at it in a progression of events, Jung started off doing dream analysis. He discovered extrovert intuition. And then because of that, he discovered cognitive senses, because it was the zero of the algebra. It is the extroverted intuition of the psychoanalysis of the psyche to be able to do cognitive senses. Then he was able to interpret dreams differently. And then as a result of that, the study of those patterns of behavior in mankind turned into tropes. And those tropes were what writers used to develop stories to bring about movies and various fictions, nonfiction approaches, all of that, all of the content that's ever been created, within that time. And even before, like Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, even before Jung, this has been happening, right? Jung just didn't like all of a sudden discover and then it started happening. No, this has been happening all along. He just realized it was happening, right? But this is where tropes come from. Tropes come from the collective unconscious. And then beyond that, you have John Beebe analyzing all of it through the movies and those tropes and those roles that people take on, those roles, etc. And then the final progression of events is where we're at now with the 4 sides of the mind. And let's bring it back to dreams. When you look at the 4 sides of the mind of dreams, something interesting happens. And let's use the whiteboard for that. Going back to, let's bring back, wow, where is my button? Please work. Gosh, I hope that works. All right, it looks like it works. I hope it stays that way. So let's look at whose type should we use? Let's see here. What type should we use? Let's look at an ISFJ. Let's look at an ISFJ for this. That's my really terrible line drawing occurs. So let's look at the 4 gateways of an ISFJ. Ooh. Apparently I can't draw. So these are the 4 gateways. We have number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, okay? So we have the 4 gateways, and each of them, you know, obviously you have the chaotic, and you have the orderly transitions for transitions. Okay, so when you're looking at dream analysis, what does that mean? That means you have a positive charge or a negative charge, positive charge or a negative charge for each of the individual cognitive gateways, positive, negative, positive, negative. I just realized I got that wrong. It's fine. I'll fix that at a later date. So when you have these transitions, you have an ISFJ right here. You have ESFP shadow going into INTJ superego, and then ENTP subconscious. And you're coming in here in a positive or negative, positive or negative, each of these ways. When one is dreaming at night, according to Jung, it's through their shadow, but I've actually noticed that dreams occur a lot within here. And what are dreams for? Dreams are basically like when the brain is like defragging itself, kind of like a hard drive would defragment itself. The brain, the human brain is actually cleaning itself in sleep, right? And that's what's happening at a physical level. But at a metaphysical level, the ego is gone to sleep. The subconscious shadow, they're kind of there, but they're really latent, and the ego is pretty dormant. And the superego sometimes comes out to play at night while everyone is asleep because it's like, ooh, it's dark. I really don't care. I can come out because the ego, subconscious, unconscious, I just don't really want to have anything to do with them, right? It doesn't want to have anything to do with them because, again, the ego, it's like, wow, it's irresponsible. The subconscious, like, wow, you're arrogant. And the unconscious, the shadow, is like, wow, you're foolish, right? So, but now that you guys are all gone to sleep, I get to come out and like have my own life now. So then there's dreams, right? However, based on a person's cognitive development, you actually could figure out, specifically from their dreams, where they are at on their state of development based on how they dream. Are they having, and by the way, guys, I am not making this claim completely, saying that this is like the de facto reason. I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer here. Obviously, your gut health, your connection to your vagus nerve, and whether or not you have viruses and gut bacteria getting into your brain and various other things can cause things like hallucinations and, very difficulties with your psyche, and it could cause a problem, nurturally speaking. I'm just talking about raw nature here. But if a person is able, if they've developed a side of their mind, their dreams would maybe over time, as we've seen so far, at least, and I'm speaking anecdotally here. I don't know if this is everyone's experience, so I'm kind of like inviting the audience to participate in this. Try to keep track of your dreams and try to see which side of your mind it's coming from. And also try to ask yourself, was it through an orderly cognitive transition or was it through a disorderly one? I've noticed that, like for example, Railgun, she'd have every now and then she gets nightmares. And there, and then she'll wake up in the night, middle of the night, kind of like freaked out. And then I just, jump over to her and hold her, and she calms down, she falls back asleep again, and which is typical stuff that married couples do, and sometimes even I have issues. Mine are like usually hallucinating like a deadly insect of some kind. It's usually kind of like my thing. But it all, or a recent dream of mine is that my ISFJ subconscious took me to a dream where I was this professional hockey player, and I was really successful at making shots. That's all my value was on the team, is that I could make a shot. So everyone on the team had to give me the hockey puck so I could get it into the net, basically. That was literally my whole sole thing, which is completely opposite to who I am. I think from an ego standpoint, I'd be better, with ISFJ subconscious being that defender and being the goalie, right? And defending our goal against the other team. And that would make me the most happiest, right? And to be the goalie requires a lot of endurance, and you have to be paying so much attention to that, right? But my dream didn't take me there, even though that's where my, ISFJ subconscious would have taken me there, right? Instead, it was more of like my ESFP superego was actually having a fun time, right? It was actually having a fun time with the other sides of my mind, not really inhibiting it or getting in its way per se. And it wasn't necessarily destructive because it was orderly, right? But there has been times where my superego comes out and it has been destructive, having dreams of revenge, right? That's a big one. That's a big one for ESFP demon, dreams of revenge, right? And there's a whole lot of other things that go along with it. But the bottom line is that my theory is that, the new form of dream analysis is you take the four sides of the mind and you understand that you have orderly and chaotic transitions going in and out of the four sides of the mind. Try to identify which side of the mind uh, somebody's dream is coming from. And barring health issues, and and you have to consider health problems too, but barring health issues, and are they actually really hitting REM sleep? Are they actually getting into that dream state and whatnot when you're looking at dreams, et cetera, and analyzing what they mean? The meaning of the dreams themselves, quite frankly, stem directly from the side of the mind itself. You know, uh, extrovert intuition demon, when it's dreaming, I've noticed it often when it's in a chaotic situation, it's like it's feeling the most unwanted versus the most wanted person. I've noticed my SE demon, for example, when my SE demon is dreaming in a chaotic or orderly way, a positive or a negative versus positive way, it's either performing or it's has absolutely zero poor performance, right? There have been dreams I've had where I've had such poor performance, I ended up dying because my performance is so bad in a particular situation. Um, like I wasn't performing well at driving, and then I died because I wasn't performing well at driving, and then that's just an SE demon kind of thing, right? The causality of poor performance leading to death, right? So you can actually utilize this as a map to interpret, people's dreams, but also use it to interpret a person's cognitive development to a point, right? And you can kind of see where that's coming from. Where are they at in their four sides? How well are they interacting with their superego? Are the majority of their dreams chaotic and negative? Are they nightmarish, or are they more balanced, or are they favoring one or another? Right? Is it subconscious related? Is it shadow related? Is it ego related? Is it superego related? All these things are questions that I would ask in that particular situation. I'd even go so far as creating like a worksheet of some kind, and then actually writing and taking these notes down for people in my family or me when they talk about dreams to try to see where it goes. But based on my own anecdotal evidence, there is a correlation. Now, correlation does not mean causation. This is why I like to invite you folks to consider this and look in your own lives within your own dreams or the dreams that people are having around you and actually discuss these topics. I've just noticed a correlation. That's all I'm saying here within this material for this conference. I've only noticed a correlation. We know that, and you could read Jung's books about dream interpretation, and that's great. But when you look at the four sides of the mind and the cognitive gateways themselves, and then compare that to cognitive development through what we have in season 19, you get to see a different way of looking at Jung's work from deep dream interpretation and dream analysis. I think that we can actually potentially find additional answers and hopefully identify some additional therapies that could be utilized to help people in this area. For example, I had a coaching client recently that did explain a dream to me, and it seemed like uh, their superego was having a really good time. And then I asked them, okay, well, how's your subconscious doing? Do you have any subconscious development? And they're like, well, no, I have no subconscious development. They're very shadow focused, this person, and it's because they're just afraid. And I'm like, well, maybe your superego is trying to tell you to stop being afraid. Your superego is trying to tell you like what it's capable of doing, right? And that's kind of the opposite, of what one would think logically speaking to tell, someone in that situation is then be like, well, if their superego is doing so well, how would you know that the subconscious is doing poorly? Well, the answer is within the shadow itself. Remember, all the functions are kind of reversed in terms of extroverted and introverted polarities, right? So what the superego may be doing externally is a negative reflection of what the subconscious is doing if the superego is the shadow of the subconscious. Or is it the shadow aspiring? That's another question you have to ask. But given that they're very shadow developed, it didn't seem like the shadow was aspiring because her shadow is already technically aspiring because she's already developed a lot of her critic functions wisdom approach, right? Again, This is all very, very subjective. And like I said, correlation does not mean causation. I've only noticed a correlation here when it comes to dream analysis. And I am not an expert at dream analysis or dream interpretation. I am not. I would even say that my sister is probably more well versed at it than I have. I've only just noticed a correlation here. So please consider this. I'd be interested in maybe, you folks getting back to me and writing to me about it. So you can email me at chase@csjoseph.life and just give me your opinions. Give me your opinions on, dream interpretation and what I presented to you this evening to see if you guys, have any thoughts or ideas or any additional anecdotes we could do about it, because I find it very fascinating. And it can also help one identify specific areas in their life if we could use the four sides of the mind and the cognitive gateways and chaotic versus orderly transitions to really get to a point where we could potentially identify the specific problems in the waking world that the superego is trying to tell the human being to fix so that it could be freer. Because the superego has dreams of its own. As much as the subconscious has aspirational dreams, or as the shadow has wisdom dreams, as much as the ego has responsibility dreams, right? Dreaming of being responsible, dreaming of being better than it is, right? Just like how the ENFP that's poor all his life, it's dreaming of becoming rich one day, right? See what I'm saying? There's a reason why our dreams are the way they are, but those dreams need to ultimately are pointing to areas in our life that need to be adjusted and fixed over time, so that we can grow ourselves as human beings, right? And I maintain that our brains, as connected to the collective unconscious, have all of these shared stories, all of these shared symbols and delusions and illusions that we utilize to basically cope with the fact that we ourselves, we know inherently that we're imperfect and we're lacking and we're like incomplete. And the journey to our superego, as long as we're taking the slow road and not the quick route, is a journey of self-improvement leading to that enlightenment. But there's obstacles along the way. I'm positing here that through the new dream interpretation, while considering the four sides of the mind and everything that it offers, we can finally get to a point where we can utilize dream interpretation to actually identify problems in a more meaningful and a more accurate way to get people set up on their journey to self-improvement, to continue their journey to cognitive development outside of the paths that I've already laid out in season 19, that is. So anyway, that's everything that I had for tonight's Ruby conference session for February 2020. Let's move on to Q&A. I'm going to give everybody in the attendees the ability to speak. And we will, everyone's going to be, it's probably going to be digging a lot in here. So I'm giving everyone the ability to speak if they have any questions or comments. And who would like to go first? You guys can talk in the chat or the Q&A window. Who would like to speak first?
Chase, if you can hear me, I can go first.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so just to make things clear, if you're more shadow focused or subconscious focused, then would you, in your dreams, are you saying you could be more in you're saying super ego, but would it sometimes mean that if you're more, let's say, like, how you have like the water example, like in How to Integrate People, would you be dreaming more in your subconscious if you're more shadow, and then vice versa? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I honestly don't know. What I've observed so far with members of my family and people that I talk about this stuff with, what I have observed so far is that if the subconscious, if their cognitive focus is on their subconscious level, the superego tends to have negative dreams when compared to the subconscious, but positive dreams when compared to the shadow, and vice versa. If the shadow is developed, the superego will have, negative dreams, and vice versa. But fair enough, that also technically contradicts what I just said about my own experience, because I am shadow focused, and I had a dream about, being that professional hockey player of super high performance, and it was a very happy dream, and it's probably the first happy dream I've had in a very long time, right? So, and sometimes it's like the superego telling you need to develop your subconscious more, or your superego, because ultimately, like, Jung posits that it's the shadow trying to talk to you about your personal development. I maintain, through the four sides of the mind, it's actually your superego trying to utilize dreams to talk to you about your personal development, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So going a little bit deeper. In terms of the actual mechanical specifics, I don't know enough about this. That's why I'm talking about it with you guys, because it's super cutting edge. I'm trying to get to a point where, you guys are able to actually participate into developing the science a little bit more so, the Ruby group and above, specifically, because there are some things that even I don't know. And this is definitely one of those areas. I just have some anecdotes and I've noticed a pattern. That's basically all I'm saying at this point. Help me figure out the rest of the pattern.
Very cool. Thank you.
Sure. Who's next? Selena, did you want to say something? I saw that you unmuted yourself. Anyone else?
I had a question.
Sure.
So the older I've gotten, I don't seem to have nearly as many dreams. Like, I might remember a dream maybe once every couple weeks, and it's usually if someone wakes me up in the middle of one.
Right.
Like, I don't really know what that means, but
I don't either. I don't often remember them either. I do. When I know that I'm getting a little bit closer to the healthier side, I have more of them. And then, there's some people who just don't seem to have any at all. And there's some people that have them all the time. I wonder if that has something to do with like sensing versus intuition. Because, like, if you think about, like, once we have our personality test up, we're going to be collecting data on all the users that have them, and then I'll be able to email like all of the intuitives at once. Be like, hey, intuitives, how many times have you dreamed over the last month? Fill out this questionnaire here, right? And then do the same thing to sensors, and just we could perform studies on our own community, basically, because we'll have everybody properly profiled in terms of what their types are, what their genders are, all this information, all this different data on all of our different users within all of the community. And then as a result, that we'll be able to communicate with them and give them the opportunity to participate in these studies. And we'll actually be able to create some interesting reports, as a result, and get some answers to some questions, right? And that's kind of, what we're hoping for. So I would imagine that dream frequency would be something, that would be very necessary. But again, this is very limiting, or it's very limited. It's limited because you still have to consider a person's health, because gut health, for example, directly impacts the brain. A lot of people don't know this, but a gut overgrowth infection of Helicobacter pylori literally breaks the blood-brain barrier and creates multiple sclerosis in women because it infests the brain. And then lesions get started on the brain and they develop multiple sclerosis symptoms. And it's just because it got past the blood-brain barrier, right? And that's because the mitochondrial output of those women are down. So there's all these other health-related issues that may or may not, that may be contributing to dreams as well. So this is an additional variable outside of the studies of dream interpretation. And it's because of these variables that most people swear off dream interpretation as nothing that's remotely concrete, 100% subjective, and not actually something that can be used in therapeutic psychiatry. Carl Jung disagreed. I also disagree. The difference is that I don't know where to draw the line between nature and nurture when it comes to dream analysis and dream interpretation. Whereas it seemed Carl Jung was kind of broad with it. And he didn't really consider a person's gut health when it came to their cognitive function. And he just kind of assumed their nature was their nature without so much looking into the nurture side. I'm saying the nature side definitely exists, and I'm sure, and I've noticed the pattern, we could definitely unlock it. The difference is that the nurture side is still there, and we don't exactly know how to completely map that quite yet, because we just don't really understand that much about the human brain to be for sure. I hope that remotely answers your question. I doubt it did, though.
Basically, there's not enough information yet. That's fine.
Oh, good.
Thanks.
Oh, good. Yeah, sure. Anyone else?
Yeah, Chase, I got one more question.
Go for it, bro.
Oh, geez. I'm losing it, but let's see if it goes through. What do you think about reoccurring dreams and its relationship to four sides of the mind? Like, is that something that, shoot, I had it, I lost it. Is it coming from like the super ego, the shadow, or the subconscious? Shoot, I had it, but what do you think just in that sense? Like, is that something that is coming from those sides of the mind, or is that just something that you're always just worried about, or just, I don't know?
So if you look at life in terms of quarter life crisis, midlife crisis, and what they exist, quarter life crisis exists for the ego to finally reach its level of personal responsibility. That's why we have quarter life crisis. Midlife crisis is when the subconscious is demanding its development. You can completely avoid quarter life crisis and midlife crisis as long as your ego and your subconscious is developed. And then you have a 3/4 life crisis, typically, if your shadow is underdeveloped. And it would seem that most people end up dying on that crisis, basically, before they are able to move to the next level. And that's just the typical approach of mankind, I guess, in terms of their cognitive development. I see there's a thing that came up in the Q&A area. I'll get to in a second. But anecdotally speaking, based on people I've coached and people in my family, I have noticed that recurring dreams at certain times of their life seem to have a lot to do with which side of their mind is not really well developed or needs to develop. In fact, I remember having a lot of recurring dreams because, and it had to do with a lot with like me being weak, and I hadn't really actually become a man yet. I didn't even consider myself a man. I knew I was a man child, right? And then there's other, recurring dreams of people dreaming constantly about being abandoned, right? And it's because deep down they don't actually, their subconscious doesn't trust whether or not, the people in their life are actually really there for them. And it's because there's a lack of trust with a lot of recurring dreams, right, in the area. But the bottom line is that I have noticed that there seems to be more recurring dreams happening that are relating to stunted growth in terms of the ego, in terms of the subconscious, and ultimately the shadow. There's a lot of stunted growth there. And those recurring dreams are ultimately warnings to get away from stunted growth. And there's actually a lot of books on this. I can't particularly quote one for you now. I was actually going to read Paul Coelho's book, The Alchemist, actually, to talk a little bit further about tonight, but I didn't have time to do that. But I believe there's a particular section within that book that is directly relevant to this. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually it does. Could I say a dream that I was having, like a reoccurring dream I was having through education, and ask you, like, where do you think this comes from? Or is it something?
Sure, why not? Just recognize I'm not an expert at dream analysis or dream interpretation. This is just typically what Jungians do. And this is an area of Jungianism that I've pretty much avoided my entire life up until recently, where I noticed that there was this pattern going on.
Right. This was a reoccurring dream and it was in relationship to stunted growth, where like I would be like done school, it'd be summertime, and I would have a dream that I'm back in like let's say summertime after university and all that, and I have a dream that I'm back in grade 11 math class and I failed, or I didn't even go through the entire semester, and then I had an exam like that day, and I'm like, what
Oh
the
yeah.
hell?
Oh yeah, I had that too. I actually, I was caught cheating one time in university, but my teacher had mercy on me, and I'd have that dream of being caught over and over and over again, or I'd have dreams about feeling the pressure of having so much homework and a lot of classes and thinking I was going to fail and fail my father, and how irresponsible that I felt and whatnot. And then come to realize later it was because I was being really irresponsible about something in my life that I needed to handle. And it was like my ego talking to me basically to get that handled. And it's like my mind is trying to remind me, like, you've done this before, but you overcame it. Don't go backwards. Don't backslide into who you used to be. Right.
Makes
And that's
sense.
kind of how I've always approached it in terms of development, because don't forget, there is development regression. You can develop backwards, guys. You can revert back to a child. We see this all the time. How many times have you heard adults who like are in their 50s? They're like, it's like you have a new childhood when you're 50. How many times have you guys heard that? Like when people are in their 50s and 60s, they're like, it's like we get to be young again. We don't have to care so much anymore. And then their growth is stunted, and they stay and they actually, and then not only is stunted, they regress. They don't continue the path to wisdom. They don't continue the path to humility. They don't continue their path. It's just like when people graduate from university and they get their degree. Yay, I'm done with education. I don't have to care about this anymore. Stunted growth, right? But there's also stunted emotional growth. You know, when it comes to like having trust for people in your life, and you have dreams that are obviously deeply rooted mistrust towards certain people, because your dream is about you being abandoned, which is one of your greatest fears, and you're living your greatest fear through your dream. But that's because you yourself don't trust it. And when you're looking at those dreams represent a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is often very common amongst typology and personality. We often make decisions to avoid something which actually inevitably cause the thing that we're avoiding. Which I have plenty of personal experience in. I know, Lev, you have personal experience with that as well. You know, we all do. And sometimes dreams can, serve as a warning to us in those particular situations.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Selena says, I'm just getting over a cold. I'll just ask her if that's okay. I've been following my dreams for quite a while and noticed a theme. Yeah, if you notice a theme, just like write it down and try to see, like, which side of the mind is this coming through? What is this? What is the deeply rooted secret here? And try to see if you notice a pattern, and see if it can indicate as to where you are in your journey. The journey being, the journey to cognitive development and integration and enlightenment, as explained in season 19, right? Look at it from that point of view. That's all I'm asking, guys, because I'd really like to know more about this and create a case study. And maybe if you guys are able to keep track of this stuff, we can have an additional conference where you guys are actually discussing these things with everybody else and sharing it with everybody else. So, teeth falling out. Yeah, I've had that. I've had that issue as well. I've had that a few times. And that's kind of like, if we're looking at things directly, be like, that would be like an extroverted sensing nemesis, worried about how you're coming off visually to other people, and maybe your super ego telling your ego you're being irresponsible for not taking care of yourself. So I'm going to scare you with this thing so you're more responsible, right? And then you feel so grateful that you have been responsible, and that is not your reality, even though it feels like reality when you're in the middle of the dream. I really don't know about wet dreams, Dom, because honestly, like I've had wet dreams. and this is like super personal, but I'll just be straight. Like what dreams that I've had are all basically recurrent dreams of sexual abuse when I was a child. It's like those dreams, I relive those experiences. I relive my abuse. Because like, you know, my sexual abuse as a kid, like I didn't consider it abuse. I didn't know it was abuse. I didn't know any different. I just hungered for it. I sought it constantly, constantly. Like it became so sick of a situation with my Stockholm syndrome of SI inferior being loyal to my cousins as a child that like when I would have those dreams, it was like I was reliving my torment and my abuse over and over and over again. But within the context of the dream, I was seeking it from them, right? It was pretty sick and twisted. And then waking up from that and then re-feeling all those feelings of shame and guilt again and again and again. And it's like almost as if it served as a warning of depravity because I was depraved. And actually a lot of the SI inferior depravity, because ENTPs can be depraved in as much as ENFPs can, but ENFPs probably a bit more. But SI inferior still has a huge connection with depravity that it was one of the reasons why I had, I allowed myself to behave in a depraved way up until my mid-20s, from a child to mid-20s. And that's just something I had to, come to terms with, right? And all with my, and then I had to develop, work ethic and self-discipline. The dreams didn't really stop until after that happened, right? So that's what I would do in that situation. Anyone else?
Chase, one more thing.
Sure.
Would you be okay with a dream journal for Ruby conference, or say Ruby people on the Discord server?
Sure. I'll ask Mr. Potsy to put that together.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Sure. Awesome. All right. Oh, dreams of losing control. Losing control in what context? Losing control in what context, good sir? Losing control of a car? Losing control of a deal? Operating a car. I've had a few of those where I'm falling backwards down a hill and I'm too small to operate the vehicle because I'm just a child stuck in this car. I'm going downhill. It's funny looking at a lot of the Jungian Dream Analysts. They're like talking about individual cognitive functions, but I honestly think it has a lot more to do with gateways and how the functions interact. But yeah, I mean, losing control. I can't really offer anything other than outside my own experience. I don't have expert sensing here, but within my own experience, losing control, it really comes down to like feeling a complete and utter lack of safety. And then realizing it's my personal responsibility to keep myself safe and take care of myself, and I not rely on necessarily others. Because like in a lot of those dreams, it was my dad that was driving, but then he had to get out of the car to go find something on the side of the road. And then the car started rolling backwards. And then I went down the hill, and that was pretty scary for me as a result. But in terms of where it's coming from, I mean, there's any number of ways to interpret it. I'm not really sure. So maybe I'll get an expert in this field actually and bring them on as a guest, and we'll have like a dream interpretation, dream analysis redux conference and actually have that conversation. maybe Mark Darian would also be able to chime in on that as well. Could ask him if you folks want me to.
Chase, one more thing.
Okay.
How do you spell Eric Pogel? I was trying to look him up the other day, and I was like, God, I want to know the difference between creationism and evolution. Like,
Poggel.
E-L. Oh, okay, I thought
If you
L.
want, I can give you his Discord ID. How about that?
Okay, sure. Let's do it up. I want to hear everything from him.
All right. He's an ISTJ. Interesting fellow.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it's Eric number 1456. As I've just told all the Ruby people, and all of a sudden everyone's adding him to friends instantly, and that'll be interesting. He'll probably freak out and block everyone, so be careful.
Eric number 1.
I don't know. I have SE and Fury. I already forgot, so you're good.
Yes, but you'll be able to watch this later. Robert says, I'm a big fan of the idea that the emotion your dream invokes is what your brain is trying to get across, and the symbolism is just means a means to that end. Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with that. That's definitely something pretty likely in that regard, I would imagine. So, all right, cool. Last call for questions, folks. All right, fair enough. I'm going to go ahead and close the conference then for February 2020. Thank you for coming. A little bit of a very far out subject matter tonight, but just kind of needed to do one of these for a while, just kind of talk about something that's really cutting edge that's like boggling my mind as I'm going throughout my day and whatnot, and as I'm encountering these things. So yeah, just think about it. We'll look at getting a dream journal. This episode will be posted later as well. And if you guys also have any requests for upcoming content, let me know. Otherwise, we'll continue to operate the Ruby conference in the way that we have been. So with that being said, folks, you'll have a good night, and I'll see you guys next month. Later.